Now, very soon we'll have some further reaction to that ruling by the UK High Court denying Julian Assange's appeal against that earlier British court ruling saying that he should be extradited to Sweden to face those sexual assault and rape charges. Julian Assange is continuing to maintain his innocence, claiming that there's lots of spin being put on that ruling overnight. So let's drill down to some of the legal details. To help us do that, we're joined now by Donald Rothwell. He's a Professor of International Law at the Australian National University, a great friend of the program, and he joins us now. Donald Rothwell, good morning.
Good morning, Michael.
What's your take on this ruling? Was it any surprise to you that the High Court rejected that earlier appeal?
Not necessarily. I think the Assange legal team knew that they were up against it in terms of some of these matters that they were raising. It needs to be understood for an Australian audience that a European arrest warrant is very similar to the types of warrants that are issued between state jurisdictions in Australia. So it's a much more streamlined process for extradition than the processes that normally apply between countries. So to that end, the English courts have interpreted the law in that sense, and it's not that surprising ultimately.
So it is very streamlined, as you say, and they're pretty much used fairly often, these arrest warrants, which would suggest that it might make it pretty hard for Julian Assange to resist it.
Well, he has an option, of course, to try to appeal this matter to the Supreme Court in the United Kingdom. He's got 14 days to lodge that application. But listening to Geoffrey Robertson last night on Lateline, it would seem that the Assange legal team feels that there is perhaps only one real option that they could pursue there on a technical issue in terms of the capacity of the Swedish prosecutor to actually request this arrest warrant. But if they elect not to appeal, or even if they do appeal, of course, there is the question as to whether or not the court will actually hear that appeal. Well, then there's every likelihood that Assange could be extradited to Sweden fairly quickly. And
there's a fairly tight test applied to any appeal to the Supreme Court. The one Geoffrey Robertson is hoping to use is any case pertaining to general public importance. Do you see it possible, based on your legal understanding of the case, for the Assange team to successfully make such a case to the Supreme Court?
Well, ultimately it goes on this technical issue as to whether it should have been the Swedish police and related authorities issuing the arrest warrant, or whether it should have been the prosecutor. Now, ultimately that's a fairly technical matter. The court might say, well, that goes to form as opposed to substance. At the end of the day, the government of Sweden or representatives of the government of Sweden are really seeking Assange for questioning over this matter. So I'm doubtful as to whether that argument would carry a lot of strength before the English courts.
And again, as we've heard quite a bit from them over the course of this case, we heard Geoffrey Robertson last night suggesting that if Julian Assange was in fact extradited to Sweden, extradition to the United States would quickly follow. Is that your legal understanding of what could happen?
Well, that's certainly the prospect. Of course, there's no current arrest warrant out for Assange that the Swedish authorities are facing at the moment. But there's a whole range of concerns that the United States could act very quickly in this matter. There's also a lot of concern that as a result of Sweden's practice over the last 10 years, that Assange could even be rendered to the United States in the absence of an arrest warrant and an extradition proceedings, which I think throws some of the spotlight back onto the Australian government in terms of how they will now be seeking to monitor these proceedings over the next few weeks.
OK, Don Rothwell from the Australian National University, thank you very much for your insights this morning.
You're welcome.